Welcome to the Seahawks Forever podcast. In-depth analysis on everything Seahawks. And now, here's your host, Dan Viens.
All right, as a little quick on the trigger on that one, you guys, welcome to this live edition of Seahawks Forever, powered by BetUS. Today, we're going to check in again and do a deeper dive into the Seahawks offensive coordinator search as they look to replace Ryan Grubb, who was fired a couple of days ago. And we have news today, a couple of reported candidates, very intriguing backgrounds. I'll let you know who those are, as well as sizing up some of the other names that have been bandied about, some that have been brought to my attention that I wasn't familiar with, and then some that just are my own ideas. And then at the end of it all, I'll tell you my three favorite candidates at this point to fill the position. Also, some big show news today, an announcement on a programming change starting in February, as well as a new channel coming. Also, let's do this again. I'm Dan. This is Seahawks Forever. Let's go.
Welcome to the Seahawks Forever podcast. In-depth analysis on everything Seahawks. And now, here's your host, Dan Viens.
The intro's so nice, we did it twice. Head on over to BetUS. You'll see all of the latest point spreads for this weekend's playoff games, as well as all the prop bets and live betting available to you. And if you sign up for a new account, they'll give you a 150% sign-up bonus on your first deposit, 125% on your second and third deposits, up to $2,000 using the promo code YouTube150. All right, welcome back, you guys. Couple of things to catch you up on. Some news, first and foremost today. Leonard Williams named Defensive Player of the Month for December. Well-deserved. Hopefully, that will help him make at least the AP All-Pro team. You know, he got the Pro Bowl snub, and then we saw the PFF All-Pro team come out earlier this week, and he was named second team. But the AP All-Pro team is the one that's really considered the All-Pro team by consensus, and that one is yet to be released yet. So hopefully that Defensive Player of the Month award will help him move one step closer to getting the recognition he deserves for the season he had. 11 sacks for the Seahawks, playing at a high level. Also, the Seahawks front office and coaching staff may be suffering some losses. Actually did today, and some of this is going to happen anytime you move on from a coordinator. Usually the people working under him are given freedom to look elsewhere, or at least consider interviews for other jobs. Mike McDonald did say that for now, Scott Huff, the offensive line coach, is staying in place, as is Jake Peetz, the passing game coordinator. But depending on who you hire as offensive coordinator to replace Grubb, they may have their own personnel that they plan to bring in. But Zach Hill, who was an offensive assistant on the staff, returning to his coaching roots, going back to Boise State as our quarterback coach, and quarterback coach Charles London interviewing for the vacant Browns offensive coordinator position. The Browns firing Ken Dorsey earlier this week. Interestingly enough, the Browns also interviewing Darrell Bevell, former Super Bowl winning Seahawks offensive coordinator who's been on the staff with Mike McDaniel in Miami. And also Matt Berry, director of pro personnel under John Schneider, has been in that front office for a long time. I think he started there in 2008, worked his way up from a regional scout to director of pro personnel. He is being interviewed in Tennessee for their vacant GM position there. If he were to leave, might that open the door perhaps for Scott Fitterer to find his way back to the Seahawks front office, the former Carolina Panthers GM who worked a very similar career path actually to Matt Berry, working his way up from a scout to assistant GM with the Seahawks before the Panthers hired him, and he was out of football last year, took a year away. A couple of programming notes. First of all, apologies. I had announced that Brian Nemhauser from Hawk Blogger Mornings and Real Hawk Talk was going to join the show yesterday. I wasn't feeling well yesterday morning, nor was he. And so we will reschedule that. I'm going to be out of town for a couple days over the weekend, getting some sunshine in Arizona. And so we'll try to hook that up next week sometime. Corbin Smith of All Seahawks and Locked On Seahawks will be joining me tomorrow, so look out for that. As I said, I'll be out of town Sunday through Tuesday, but if there's any breaking news, if the Seahawks hire an offensive coordinator, I will be in a position to be able to react to that while I'm there. And then I said there'd be a couple announcements. One is not a surprise if you've watched the show for the last week. the new channel that's debuting actually this Saturday with a full NFL first round mock draft. Bryce Coots of the Hawks Own Rundown and I are joining forces and joining our draft addiction. We're going to do a full-time draft channel looking outside of Seattle and looking across the league. It will not be Seahawks centric. All draft all year is the slogan for that one. And that one is already built. You can go over to, if you search at The Pick Is In on either Twitter or YouTube, you'll be able to find those accounts and get subscribed to them. So you're ready to roll. Also, I keep getting asked about merchandise. I've mentioned it a few times. I am working on it. It's a process. It might take a few more weeks, especially with some of the transition stuff that I'm going to be going through the next few weeks. And so, but keep an eye out for that. Many of you have asked me about that. There will be merchandise available very soon. Okay, so first of all, today's news. Let me throw these names up on the board. A couple of reports coming out earlier today that the Seahawks have planned, scheduled interviews with two candidates, Thomas Brown, who had quite the ride with the Chicago Bears in 2024, and Hank Fraley, who is the offensive line coach. And that is a typo. He is not with the Packers. He's with the Lions. So my apologies to that little copy and paste that went awry there. Hank Fraley is the current offensive line coach with the Lions. Thomas Brown with the Bears. What's interesting about these two guys, Fraley more so than Brown, is just their background. A little bit on both these players. Thomas Brown, former running back at Georgia, worked his way up through the college ranks as a coach before joining the Rams staff in 2020. So he's yet another one of those Sean McVay disciples. He joined them as a running back coach, and then by 2021 was given the title of assistant head coach. Held that title in 21 and 22 while coaching tight ends and running backs. Then was hired as offensive coordinator of the Panthers in 2023 under Frank Reich. The Panthers started 0-6, and then Reich, who was calling plays at the time, actually handed play calling duties to Thomas Brown. It didn't get much better after that. He won his first one, but the Panthers went 2-9 the rest of the way. But, keep in mind that year was Bryce Young's rookie year. Panthers didn't have a whole lot in the wide receiver room that season. They really struggled on the offensive line up front. And then last year, moved on to the Bears, started out as their passing game coordinator, was promoted to offensive coordinator when Shane Waldron was fired, and then named interim head coach when Matt Eberflus was fired. And then Hank Fraley. This guy's really interesting to me, a name I didn't know. 11 seasons in the NFL as an offensive lineman, as an undrafted free agent. So a guy that just, went out there and made a career for himself, despite the fact he wasn't drafted. Started out in college coaching and kind of worked his way through the ranks there until he joined the Vikings staff in 2014. He's been at the Lions since 2018 and has been their offensive line coach since 2020. What's interesting about the Fraley report is that Albert Breer reported that he is already doing work to put a staff together, and in particular is talking to candidates that would presumably come with him as passing game coordinator. Now, that wouldn't speak well to Jake Pietz's future if the Seahawks wanted to retain him. But as I said before, you're going to allow a coordinator to come in and bring his guys if he believes in him. And if that were to happen, I'll get more into Fraley a little bit later. But if that were to happen, keep in mind, quarterback coach for the Detroit Lions is Mark Brunell, former UW quarterback, former longtime Jacksonville Jaguars quarterback. Might he be the guy that would be in line to be the passing game coordinator? Now, a lot of moving parts here, right? If Ben Johnson takes a head coaching job this year, and most assume that he will after saying I'll take a pass last year. Tanner Engstrand is the current pass game coordinator there in Detroit. He may prefer to stay in Detroit. He may be the presumed guy to be promoted and get Johnson's job and fill his shoes. In which case, he may try to take Brunell with him as well. So that would be kind of an interesting dynamic there. Let's put this back up, take a look at some of these other names again. These are names that have either been mentioned or just kind of widely assumed because of connecting dots. Marcus Brady, the first one on that list, that comes straight from Bryce. He has been a big proponent of his because of his background. He has the Jim Harbaugh connection. He's actually working for him currently as his passing game coordinator with the Chargers. And this is what kind of sparked Bryce's interest, and we talked about it on our live stream the other day. Because Mike Macdonald was asked on Tuesday at his year-end press conference about Jim Harbaugh and his comment about the offensive line, how everything kind of starts and stops with that. And it kind of prompted a tangent from Macdonald just about how much he admires Harbaugh and his approach to the game. And it sounds like Macdonald's image of what he wants his offense to be kind of mirrors what Harbaugh does, although I don't think Macdonald at his core would be as conservative as Harbaugh. I think Macdonald wants a physical, intense, running style of football, rushing game that can dictate terms when you can run the football when you have to and convert third and shorts and second and short and run to burn the clock when the other team is expecting you to, all of that. But I also think he wants explosive offense. He wants to be able to hurt teams downfield and use the play action off of that running game to create some of that. Brady, a longtime offensive coordinator in the CFL after a playing career there as a quarterback, was with the Colts in 2018. He replaced Nick Sirianni there when he got the job with the Eagles. So he was under Frank Reich, second Frank Reich connection we've had so far in these names. He was in Indianapolis through 2022, fired with the rest of his staff there. And the interesting thing about his time in Indianapolis, if you look back at that roster there during the years he was there, it was, Matt Ryan at the end of his career. He clearly had lost his fastball. They didn't have much in the wide receiver room there, but they had Jonathan Taylor, and they had one of the best offensive lines in the league, and they were able to run the football when teams knew that that's really all that they could do. Interesting there. Mike Kafka, of course, is a guy that I've got him on my list. Didn't get him on this graphic, though. Sorry about that. But the Seahawks, we know they interviewed him twice for head coach last year and tried to interview him again for coordinator after Macdonald was hired, but the Giants blocked that move. So you would think that he would be in the discussion again, and he may be free to leave the Giants. There have been some word that Dable may make some changes to his staff there, and that Kafka may be let go. Clint Kubiak is another one. He was a super hot name last year, coming off of Shanahan's tree. Of course, all that history with his dad. Not a great year with the Saints, but they had all sorts of injury issues and a lot of dysfunction down there anyway, firing their head coach, midway through the season. But again, he was a super hot name last year that I think a lot of people wanted the Seahawks to consider, but he was hired early in that process before Macdonald was hired here. Doug Peterson grew up in Ferndale, right? He's a Washington guy. The only question there, he might be a fit, but would he want to immediately take a coordinator job again after being a head coach? Let go by Jacksonville. He's also still going to get paid from Jacksonville. He may just decide to do what a lot of these head coaches do when they're fired and take a year off. Haven't heard anything definitive about any interest in Peterson yet. Brian Schottenheimer, this is an idea that was floated a couple months ago by Corbin Smith, who, again, will be joining me tomorrow. We'll get his latest thoughts on this search. Guys, certainly with a running background, there were some questions about his how adept he was at scheming in the pass game. His passing concepts were called vanilla at the time, and you remember 2020 when Russ got off to the great start, was in the MVP conversation, and then teams figured out kind of how to play too high and take the deep pass away, and that offense really went in the tank the second half. So even though he oversaw three of the best offenses the Seahawks had under Pete Carroll, and certainly has an emphasis of running the football on his resume, some questions about the passing game. Now he's been learning from Mike McCarthy, presumably for the last few years. And Mike McCarthy is a guy that we know John Schneider has a reverence for, a tremendous amount of respect for. So that would be the connection there. And then the name David Shaw keeps coming up. I think he came up last year as well. I know Seattle Sports 710 and Brock Hewards talked about him quite a bit. Brock brought his name up to Daniel Jeremiah, I think today. The thing that's interesting about Shaw is, you think of him as, well, he's a college football retread. He's an old guy. He's kind of old and stuck in his ways. That perception is not true. He's still just 52 years old. That's not old in the coaching circles. And the thing about Shaw is he had an NFL background before he went back to college. So he was an NFL coach, quarterback coach, wide receivers coach for a couple different teams between 1997 and 2004. Then he went with Jim Harbaugh to the University of San Diego in 2006, followed Harbaugh to Stanford. They had all that success there. He was his offensive coordinator. And then he succeeded Harbaugh in 2011 and coached the Cardinal for 11 years. He is now working actually in the Broncos front office. I didn't know this until this morning as a senior personnel executive. So if he's still interested in coaching, if you want the Jim Harbaugh influence, how about Harbaugh's right-hand man for, they were together for 5 years, and then Shaw took those principles and carried them forward and had a lot of success at Stanford. We remember how physical that program was running the football. Toby Gerhart, of course, Christian McCaffrey, some other guys. Oh, shoot, who's the guy? I think he led the nation in rushing and then blew his knee, and the Redskins drafted him. He never got healthy again. I'm blanking on the name, but lots of success there running the football. Very, very pro style. We're talking tight end and a fullback. I don't know if that's what David Shaw would be today. He's been back in the NFL now, and as kind of an assistant and a consultant, and now with Broncos, he, being around Sean Payton every day, and Sean Payton and his very complex passing game, if any of that rubbed off on him, that might be kind of a perfect hybrid for Shaw. Certainly a guy also that you would think could put a staff together, a really good staff immediately. So those are the names, that we've got. Just put them up on the screen in case you're just joining us. And then, Kafka belongs on this list as well. I think it's a solid list. But the other thing to keep in mind is this. We don't know. They said they've put in some slips, and that would include, Fraley, because the Lions are in the playoffs. They would have had to put a slip in for him. Another name on this list that didn't make it on the graphic is Adam Stenavich. Now, this is another one that I had never heard. But he showed up in a piece Corbin Smith did a couple of days ago, listing 9 candidates, I think, potentially for the job that would make sense. And this one checks a lot of boxes. Checks all the boxes, except he's never called plays at the NFL level. But remember, Mike McDonald was asked a couple of days ago, is that a prerequisite? Is it a requirement? Are you looking for that? And he said, not necessarily. He wants a guy that they're married in their vision of what they want the identity of the offense to be. Here's Stanovich's resume. Played offensive line in the NFL. Still looks like he could from some pictures I saw. And then he became an assistant offensive line coach in San Francisco for a couple of years. So exposure there, right? He's a Shanahan tree guy. Then went to Green Bay with Matt LaFleur when he got the head coaching job in 2019. He coached the offensive line, and he was the run game coordinator before being promoted 3 years ago to offensive coordinator. Now, we know that when you're the offensive coordinator in Green Bay, you don't call plays. It's very similar to being the OC with the Rams. But you're involved. You do everything but call plays on game day. What I don't know is if Stanovich has gotten any exposure to calling plays in the preseason. That's something that McVay will do in LA. He'll give his coordinators a chance to call plays. Shane Waldron got to do it in a preseason game before he was hired by the Seahawks. We actually saw Mike LaFleur call plays last week against the Seahawks in Week 18. I don't know if LaFleur has done that at all for Stanovich. But look at the way the Packers play football. I mean, balanced offense. From 1 week to the next, they're not predictable. They don't look the same from 1 week to the next. Look what they did to us a month ago. Came out with an offensive line that was built with no marquee names, no first-round picks, no big-time free agents, all day 2 and day 3 draft picks that all had less than 3 years in the league. And they manhandled us physically, and they didn't do anything intricate. It was just hat on a hat. man to man, take your guy and block him. And they ran the football down our throats in the first quarter and a half. You know, LaFleur might not be the best play caller in the NFL. I think most people consider McVay to be that, but he's top 3 for me. And so being in that environment and watching what Matt LaFleur can do and being involved in game planning for that, having an offensive line background, he's going to be wired that way. He's going to have that mentality. 3rd and 2, we're running the football because I know that my guys can beat their guys. What I find interesting about such a heavy offensive line background flavor to these names that we're hearing so far is it tells me that there is going to be a commitment to building that unit. And I've been saying this, you guys. I'll continue to say it till I'm blue in the face for the next 6 months. And I hope to goodness that they go out and prove me right this offseason so I don't look like a fool. But the way to build that unit into a great offensive line, or even a good one, I think most of us agree, if it could just get up into we said this about the defense last offseason, and it rang true. If it can just go from the bottom to the middle, this team is going to contend for championships. I believe that. You don't have to go out and spend a bunch of money and sign a bunch of marquee fantasy football names in order to do that. You don't need to go out and sign Trey Smith and Ryan Kelly and Zach Martin. You don't need to do that. They've spent a bunch of draft picks on that offensive line in the last 4 years, going back to Cross and Lucas. They're not going to just give up on all those guys. Those guys all got meaningful reps this year as well. So I think it's going to be a combination of the players we have, plus, of course, there's going to be a key addition or two. Certainly you keep taking your shots in the draft every year in the trenches, but I do think there will be a not insignificant free agent move made. It may not be Trey Smith, but I think they'll go out and get a guy. Now, what's interesting about some of these connections, in particular, Hank Fraley, is Kevin Zeitler is a guy that Seahawks tried to sign last offseason. Imagine potentially what could have been if Zeitler had signed with us, and then the Seahawks wouldn't have signed Laken Tomlinson, and he's your left guard. And he showed this year in Detroit he has plenty left in the tank, but that was a one-year deal. Maybe it gives the Seahawks a shot to bring Kevin Zeitler in as a guy that can give some veteran presence to that line. Okay, let me do this, and then we'll come back, and I'll give you my 3 favorites from this list. You hear me talk about them all the time, but this has absolutely become my favorite apparel company, Doer, built for doing, D-U-E-R. They have flagship stores in L.A. and Denver. Just outstanding stuff. Those jeans you see right there in the middle, they're relaxed, stretched jeans. I love those things. I wear them almost every day. They feel like joggers when you wear them, but when you pick them up and you pull them apart, you see how they're built. They're built to last. They're built for doing. Their moleskin shirt there, I've got a couple of those, incredibly stylish, very soft, very comfortable. You can wear them in a number of different applications. This is the best apparel company you've probably never heard of, you guys. Doer, built for doing. And right now they're going to give you 20% off your first order if you go to shopdoer.com/forever. That's shopdoer, DUER/forever. All right. So my 3 favorites on this list, and I would put them, I guess, I put them in order, but it's kind of a 3-way tie for me. Like, I have no way to really know which of these guys is going to be the best because neither guy has extensive experience calling plays at the NFL level, and 2 of these 3 have no experience calling plays at the NFL level. So Marcus Brady, Hank Fraley, and Adam Stenavich are my 3 favorites. You know, Brady with his connections to Harbaugh and some of the things he's done in his career, a little bit more diverse experience. He's called plays for a couple of years at the NFL level and had some success, certainly running the football with Jonathan Smith in Indianapolis. And then Fraley, the Detroit Lions have become that organization now that you just want to tap into that thing that they have. And I think Dan Campbell's going to be that next guy that constantly churns out head coaches, and his coaching tree is going to expand. I think Aaron Glenn's going to get one of the head coaching jobs this year as defensive coordinator. I think Ben Johnson's going to get one of the others. and then you see maybe a guy like Fraley comes out here and he takes the offensive coordinator job. He has a couple of great years and he becomes a head coaching candidate. He's a guy that you look at him, look at pictures. I should have prepared one for you. He's a guy, it's on the thumbnail. He's the guy with the beard just looking like this. Like, he just looks like a guy that wants to kick your ass. And it's going to embody, I think, as close as we could come to what the Detroit Lions have. I mean, imagine, I would imagine if he's the choice, he would insist. He would need to be satisfied that there's a commitment here from the Seahawks to build that offensive line so he can hit people in the mouth and do what he wants to do and what they did in Detroit. And you look at what they do in Detroit, and it's amazing how when David Montgomery's healthy, they can hit you with kind of that fire and lightning, right? Or thunder and lightning, I guess would be the analogy, where they can hit you in the mouth with Montgomery and his physical running style, and then they can, Jahmyr Gibbs will just get you spinning in circles and corkscrew you into the turf. I think he would have to be intrigued by the Seahawks running back room for certain. And a quarterback in Geno, this experienced guy that's been around and that he can count on picking up the scheme right away. Now, what we don't know about a guy like Fraley or even Stenavich is, or even Brady, because he's only worked with veteran quarterbacks. Can he develop a young quarterback? That has to be a quality you're looking for in the next offensive coordinator, because at some point in the next potentially 4 months, I'd say in the next 4 to 18 months, or I guess technically 4 to 16 months, in one of the next 2 drafts, you have to draft a quarterback that you think might have a shot to be your long-term starter moving forward, a guy that you can develop into a franchise quarterback. Fraley, we don't know what kind of exposure he's had to that. So that would maybe largely depend on who he brings with him. Now, Mark Brunell, it's a good place to start. I'd love to see that. I think that pairing would be really, really cool. And then Stenavich, he's been in Green Bay. He's been part of that staff that developed Jordan Love for a couple of years while he was sitting behind Aaron Rodgers. So he's had exposure to that sort of setup and environment. An established veteran quarterback, a young guy behind him biding his time, but a guy that you're trying to stay involved in the process as much as possible because you want him to be the guy. So really, really intrigued by those names. And then keep in mind this too. There's guys out there that we don't know about yet. There's probably names out there in the playoffs that they've turned slips in for that we're not aware of. I've heard the name T. Martin a lot from Baltimore. He's their quarterback coach now. He does have play calling experience at the college level. He was an offensive coordinator at USC for a couple of years. The thing about T. Martin is this: if Mike McDonald had an affinity for him, liked him, thought he could be that guy, why didn't he bring him with him last year? They didn't even interview him, reportedly. So it just wouldn't make sense to me that now, a year later, that they would consider him for that position. But there are other guys, especially now that you see sort of the net they're casting. And some of these guys, again, are not only the top 2 that I mentioned have reportedly scheduled interviews, and that's Thomas Brown and Hank Fraley. So the rest of these names are just speculation at this point. The fact that they're looking heavily and potentially looking at more guys that have an offensive line background is intriguing to me. But it also opens up the possibility that there could be 10 other names out there. I mean, how many of us that are diehard football fans can name all the offensive line coaches in the league, right? I don't know, maybe 15 years ago I could have named half of them because they tended to stick around longer, and some of them really built names for themselves. But yeah, there's guys out there I'm sure that they're going to interview that we're not even thinking about right now. And so as that continues, of course, I'll keep you updated and give you my opinion on that. And we'll talk a lot more about this tomorrow with Corbin. Bunch of you watching. Thanks for that, you guys. I've still got that big announcement about this show coming up in just a minute and the future of it. Oh, here we go. Okay. You guys chipping in with some up-to-date news. Amy Holmes said the Seahawks have requested to interview Clint Kubiak. Now, you might ask yourself, why would they have to request to interview someone who is not in the playoffs? If you're under contract, then you have to request with the team. And to my knowledge, Kubiak hasn't been released yet. I think that whole staff is still technically under contract. And typically that's how it works. Teams will, if they fire a head coach, usually the staff, sometimes they fire the entire staff, but usually they let him stay on until the new coach is hired because he may want to retain some of those players. That is really cool because Kubiak is a guy that was very, very hot name last year. Yep. Okay. So this is great. That's what I love about the live interaction. Jeremy Fowler is reporting that. Let me see if there's anything else that I've missed out at. Michael Harder, love me a prior offensive line or tight ends coach and experienced offensive coordinator. Yeah, look at Dan Campbell. Dan Campbell's a guy that didn't have play calling experience and didn't have, he wasn't even an offensive coordinator. He was like an offensive line and special teams guy and tight ends guy, right? But he just had the qualities to make a great head coach. Well, I think the same can be said for offensive coordinators. It's one of those things where it's like when you're young and you're trying to get credit. You're like, wait, they won't give me credit because I don't have credit, but I need credit to get credit. You don't always have to have play calling experience to get a play calling job because you got to start somewhere, right? At some point, you have to project that a guy can call plays who hasn't in the past. And look at all the best play callers in the league. They all got a start somewhere, right? Let's see. Robert says he's in Arizona. What's the weather like right now? I'm going to be down there Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. Looking forward to some good weather. I'm going down next month too for longer. So, Hawkmaniac says T. Martin all the way, winning pedigree, knows McD and the Harbaugh as well, and 20 years of coaching experience. Again, I would ask this though: why not last year? Phobia says he likes the Fraley idea. The idea of a line coach to be OC is intriguing. Amy says he looks like a bruiser. Yeah. Ben Bazer says, how about Byron Leftwich? He was offensive coordinator with Tampa when they won their last Super Bowl. True, but he didn't call plays. Bruce Arians did. I think Arians gave up play calling duties to him the last year he was there. Was that year? I'm not sure. I know Leftwich was a real hot name for a while. I just don't, I have no opinion on, I don't know. He's been out of the league. He hasn't been calling plays. I'm not quite sure what I would think about a Leftwich candidacy. X-Wing says, yep, Bryce Coots turned me on to Marcus Brady. Johansson says, I wonder what the real reason for the Grubbs firing was. I think McDonald's been pretty transparent about it, pretty upfront. I think personally they got along and liked each other and worked well together. It just didn't. I think McDonald was looking for development. He was looking for progress. If there had been some sign, and some might say, hey, the last 5 games of the year, they averaged 5 yards per carry. Cool. But did you feel like in any of those games, except the Arizona one, that they dictated the terms of the game and controlled the game through the running game? The Chicago Bears game is the one that really stands out to me. First drive, they ran the football as well as they've run it all year outside of that Arizona game in Glendale. 48 yards rushing. They get all the way down inside the 10. Then it's 3rd and 3, goes empty backfield, and the drive stalls. The rest of the game, they struggled running the football. If there had been an improvement in our ability to run the football and sustain drives consistently throughout a game, not just here and there, we forget sometimes, or maybe we take for granted or just take it too lightly, that these guys spend an incredible amount of time working together, 10, 12, sometimes 16-hour days. So it's not just the stuff that we see on the field that goes into these decisions. And there had to be something And if you haven't read that Corbin Smith piece, go back and read it. There's nothing that implied that Grubb was hard to work with or that he was stubborn or that he was resistant to ideas. It just didn't get done on Sundays. There had to be something Mike Macdonald saw that led him to believe that he didn't think it was going to get any better with another offseason. Like sometimes you can tell as someone who was a general manager in the restaurant and bar business for over a decade, sometimes you can just tell someone's going to work out or not, despite their positives. They might be the most likable person in the world. Their resume could be fantastic. Sometimes you just know it's not a fit. And those are things that, he's probably not ever going to talk about openly. But I don't think there's anything devious or dastardly or anything like that went on behind the scenes at all. I think Ryan Grubb was incredibly committed to his job, very, very smart, worked hard at it, just wasn't wired the same way that Macdonald is for how he sees the game. This may be part of it. Michael Harder says, I don't think Grubb was as intense or direct as Macdonald. Grubb did have a very calm demeanor, very laid back personality. And, we see that from Macdonald, when the way he presents himself to us and to the press and the public. But I think we also see an intensity there in how he attacks the game. And maybe that wasn't a stylistic match or a philosophical match as well. See, Tom says he probably got mad about JS not getting him some interior offensive line help. Mad. He was fired. He didn't quit. And that he was John Schneider's scapegoat. I have not thought for 1 second since Ryan Grubb was fired that this wasn't a Mike Macdonald decision. I don't think this was a John Schneider or a front office decision. This was a Mike Macdonald decision. You could start, especially now with the hindsight that we have being 2020, you can look back about a month and you can start to see the way he would react after games and some of the tension in his jaw and the way that he would phrase things. He hasn't been happy with Ryan Grubb for a while, and that Corbin Smith piece really points that out. This was a Mike Macdonald call. I am certain of that. SL Hazard says it doesn't have to be a super creative offense. Just make sure to run the ball and make smart decisions. Sprinkle in some unexpected plays, and we're ready for a playoff run. Yeah, there's a lot to be said for that. I do think in this modern NFL, you have to have some pretty complex passing concepts because defenses are so intricate now and dynamic and sophisticated that you got to be able to try and stay a step ahead of that. You do at the end of the day, in some ways, no matter how physical you are, no matter how much you can talk about wanting to beat teams when they know what's coming, you also have to be able to deceive and surprise teams. Absolutely. Tom says can't run the ball when the interior offensive line is letting your running backs get hit in the backfield. Sure. But we saw them run the ball better later in the year. And there's a couple of reasons for that, I believe. One is you finally had some continuity on the offensive line. Olu Oluwatimi got a chance to start 7-8 games in a row with Satawa Leman next to him and Abe Lucas next to him. The same group of 5 guys got to play 6, 7, 8 games together. And you started to see that come together. I think the other change that happened that led to the improvement or contributed to it anyway, is I've talked pretty openly here about my frustrations with Ken Walker and his running style and he doesn't see the field as well as Charbonnet and McIntosh do. He wants to make something happen in the running game instead of let it happen. And I think we saw that, there were some seams there that weren't taken advantage of when Walker was the guy getting the ball. And so it's easy to blame the offensive line when you see 8 carries for 26 yards. But if you look at the tape, you look at the all-22, and you can see, well, shoot, that should have been a 10-yard gain right there. Why is he bouncing that outside? Why isn't he? There's the hole. He should have followed that block. I think we saw more of that from Charbonnet and McIntosh, and we saw that unit come together as well. Again, you're not going to improve this line by getting rid of all 5 and finding 5 new ones. You're going to piece together some pieces that are there because there's some very, very, very high-end talent there. I'm telling you. I think 4/5 of the, I'll say this, 4/5 is a little aggressive. There's at least 3/5 of a very good offensive line already in place. And I would argue there's 2 or 3 more other young guys that are part of the solution, whether that is as depth, a guy that can come in and win some games for you if he has to, or can compete for starting spots on the line. There's pieces there. You're not going to flush out all of those draft picks you've made over the last couple of years. But for certain, any new offensive coordinator is going to want some assurances that there's a plan to make that unit better. Because why would I take a job? I know there's only 32 of them in the league, right? And so if I'm offered an offensive coordinator job from this team and I have no other offers, I'm probably going to take it. But ideally, you also want to know that you have a chance to succeed and run your scheme and be successful at it. And if I'm a coordinator interviewing with the Seahawks, that's my first question to them. You know, when you get to that part of the job interview where they go, do you have any questions for us today? And most of us in the real world ask things about break times and parking, time off. Whoever's interviewing for the Seahawks coordinator job, the first thing they're going to ask is, what are you going to do about that offensive line? But also, one of my biggest critiques of Ryan Grubb is that he didn't do enough to help himself. There are things you can do to try to offset or mitigate a poor offensive line. Quick game, 12 personnel, 13 personnel, not leaving your tackles on an island, which Grubb did at a rate that was top 5 of the league. Here's an example. I've got some notes here on Stenovich. Listen to this. He was the offensive line coach and offensive coordinator in 2021. Didn't call plays, but he schemed everything. He put the game plan together. 2021, the Packers had massive injuries on their line. Massive injuries. So they end up starting 3 undrafted free agents, a second-year 6th rounder, and a 4th-round rookie in 2021. That was their offensive line. A 4th-round rookie, a second-year 6th rounder, and 3 undrafted free agents. Rodgers won the MVP, and both of their running backs rushed for over 750 yards, A.J. Dillon and Aaron Jones. That's what a good play caller and Mike LaFleur, offensive line coach, coordinator, run game coordinator, everybody working together. That's how you can help mitigate an offensive line that's not as talented. You can succeed despite that. I would argue that a better play caller would have got us into the playoffs. That's my argument. And I'm sticking to it. Let's see. A bunch of you jumping in, letting me know about Kubiak. That's great. This is interesting. X-Wing says, Brock and Salk said he had some personal... Oh, Salk said he had some personal experience, or Brock did, with T. Martin in the past. He left less than impressed. Greetings from Belgium. Thank you, Benoit. Did I say that right? Tom Elm says, what about Mark Brunell? Maybe he gets a shot as coordinator. That is an interesting idea, and one that Bryce brought up the other day as well. Hey, Bryce. Speaking of Bryce, Kubiak, not Stanley Kubrick, I'm sure, from... Wow, what did he was the sci-fi director, right? Yeah, anyway. He's interesting because he comes from the Shanahan zone run scheme. Yeah. Here's a vote for Eric Bieniemy. You always hear that every year. No. No. Did you see what he did with the Commanders in his 1 year as a play caller? No. He's an absolute no for me. And for most of the teams because he hasn't gotten another opportunity. Bryce, thanks for contributing. Really appreciate that. Always appreciate your support. Speaking of that, be sure if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, hit that bell for notification of future episodes, and check the description for all the other ways you can support the show. Let's see. James, I hope we can find someone who embraces the discipline and toughness we lacked on offense. Just feel like we were bullied at times against teams we definitely had the talent to beat. Yeah, I think that's the goal. I think that's what Coach McDonald has said he's looking forward to. Okay, so I promised a show announcement, and I'm going to make it because sometimes I promise things at the beginning of the show and then I forget. Sorry, guys. It just happens sometimes. I know. Try hosting your own podcast sometimes. It's not as easy as you think. So as I think about the future of this show and this channel and where I want it to head and where I want to take it, and ultimately the goal, I've talked openly about this and will continue to do so, is I'm working towards being able to do this full time and just create content full time for you, not have to be held hostage by the demands and the obligations of a full-time career. And trying to balance those is tough sometimes. I have been burning the candle at both ends for quite a while here, and it's one of the reasons I'm going to go spend a couple of days in the sun in Arizona. So just thinking about how to format the show and approach it with some consistency, some reliability, how to give you the best, quality and value for what you get from the show. And so I am going to, starting in February, I'll have an official launch date coming up soon. I'm going to switch to a daily live format. So starting in February, there's going to be a transition taking place. Once I get settled, then the plan right now is, and this is tentative, but I'll lock it in and promote it shortly, be Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. I'm trying to find a time slot so it doesn't interfere or compete with some of the other live content in the Seahawks world that's out there. I don't want to force you all to have a hard choice. Do I watch this one or do I watch that one? So I'll figure out a time, but I think that would work. 10, maybe 11. But it would be daily, Monday through Friday live. That way I get this. I get the engagement. I get your comments. I get to tap in a little bit more to my broadcast journalist background and do a little bit more daily, like breaking news. A lot of times, a lot of NFL news breaks on East Coast time, early in the morning. Schefter and Rappaport and those guys get up early. So I can react to that. Coaches' shows and press conferences sometimes are early. We can react to that. And we'll continue to bring you, the guests and the best and brightest from the Seahawks podcast and media world out there, as well as the channel grows, hopefully some players, ex-players, coaches, some of those names that have been on the show already. And doing it live just gives a lot of flexibility. You can, if the guest is on live with me, you'll be able to engage and interact and ask them questions. And if their schedule doesn't allow for them to come on the live show, I can always pre-record it and just insert it that way. So really excited about that. So look for announcements regarding that coming up in the next couple of weeks. In addition to that, just a reminder about the Pick Is In, at the Pick Is In on Twitter and YouTube. Head on over there and subscribe to that channel. That'll be Bryce and I teaming up to do a channel focused solely on the NFL draft league-wide, not just the Seahawks. So do not fret. All of the Seahawks focused draft content you will still continue to see here on the channel. Speaking of the Pick Is In, Saturday will be our debut episode. Bryce and I are going to walk through an entire first round mock for the entire league, pick by pick. We're going to alternate and kind of start working through that and try to get a lay of the land of how it might fall leading up to the Seahawks pick. And then certainly some things happening around the NFC West and elsewhere around the conference. So that's what's going on. And then, of course, I'll be in Mobile, Alabama, the last week of this month to cover the Senior Bowl. I'll be there the whole week. So I plan to do live check-ins every evening after practices and media availabilities are wrapped up. And then, of course, a recap of the game. And then when I come home from that, all sorts of content that following week about some of the guys that I saw there that was impressed by the most, some positional breakdowns, things like that. Seahawks specific stuff will be done here. And then we'll do some other league-wide stuff on the Pick Is In. So hop in on that as well. Shout out to BetUS for sponsoring this program today as well. Gerald Austin, couple more you snuck in here, said, let's do Chip Kelly. He's one that I could have easily added to that graphic because we know the Seahawks looked into him last year, had an interview. I think may have had two. It may have been reported that he interviewed twice last year before they hired Ryan Grubb. Went to Ohio State. He might be happy there with what they got going there. Might want to try and win a national championship. Might want to coach Quinn Ewers, or whoever ends up transferring there. Interestingly enough, speaking of draft news, Georgia quarterback Carson Beck announced today he is not going to enter the NFL draft after all. It had been reported a couple weeks ago he was going to make himself available for the draft. He's entering the transfer portal, so he's not going back to Georgia. This is very, very similar, very reminiscent of what Cam Ward did last year, where he announced he was joining the draft, And then he went back into the portal, presumably because a combination usually of what you hear back from the NFL advisory committee. You know, they may have told Beck, we don't have a draftable grade on you. Actually, so the three levels, just so you know, that the advisory committee comes back with are, we think you're a first-round pick, we think you're a day 2 pick, or we think you should go back to school. They don't say, we think you're a third-day pick, or we think you're undraftable. They say, first, day 2, or go back to school. So Beck now not in this draft class any longer. What if he went to Ohio State, right? They need a guy. Will Howard's graduating. Anyway, just an idea there. Bryce says, I think Kubiak could be interesting, but the question is what staff he can assemble. Gosh, that tree though, right? That Shanahan tree. There's so many people out there. Another name that I haven't given a lot of weight to just because the buzz seems to have worn off, but the Seahawks interviewed Frank Smith twice last year for head coach. He's the offensive coordinator under McDaniel in Miami. He has an offensive line coaching background also. So you'd think that he might be a fit. I just haven't heard any buzz around him this time around. Also, they chose Grubb over him. They could have hired Smith because he doesn't call plays in Miami. Let's see. Rockman Drums says Chip would clash with Mike big time. That would be an interesting consideration. Chip Kelly's a very strong personality, right? He pissed off a lot of players when he was in Philadelphia, but that was a long time ago, and that was as a head coach, and he's kind of been, I don't know if humbled's the right word. I don't know if you can humble Chip Kelly, but, players learn. I'm going to keep going back to this quote. Mike McDonald the other day in his press conference said, players are allowed to get better. To which I said, so are coaches, so are GMs, right? Anyone who is committed to being good at their job looks for ways to get better. I do, even at my ancient age, and as long as I've been doing the things that I do professionally. I still every day, I feel like I learned something I didn't know, and that I don't know more than I know, and that I learn something every day. Corey says, Beck gives me Daniel Jones vibes. Beck will probably go to the Miami Hurricanes. I could see that happening. I know Miami went hard after John Mateer, and I get the Daniel Jones vibe from him as well. And I've used the Daniel Jones comp in regards to Riley Leonard out of Notre Dame too, where my old college roommate, Tim Rosenbaugh, played quarterback for the Cougs and went on to play for what was then the Phoenix Cardinals. Used to use the term Cadillac quarterback to me, and he used it in reference to Tom Tupa, who was with the Cardinals at the time. A guy that looks like you created a quarterback in a lab. 6'5", lean, athletic, beautiful throwing motion. Everything looks pretty. In warm-ups, he looks pretty. If you go watch pregame warm-ups, you might, and you didn't know who was who, you might think, oh, that guy's the starter, right? But doesn't have the instincts, doesn't have the moxie, doesn't have those intangibles, that kind of grit that a quarterback needs to really succeed in the NFL. Beck would seem to have some sort of personality things and things outside the lines that have turned some teams off. And then the fact that he didn't play as well this year in Georgia, didn't take a step forward. I think it's a smart move for him to go back to college. I think Jalen Milroe should do the same. I think he's making a mistake. And maybe now that he's declared for the draft, I think players have until the 17th to withdraw from the draft if you've previously declared. I think that's the date. I could be wrong, but I would hope Milroe would go back to college. I think he should. I think he's making a mistake coming out. That being said, depending on where in the draft, I'd be intrigued as a developmental guy. Like I've said before, if you're wondering where I sit on this, you shouldn't, because I've tried to be really adamant about it. And in fact, if you haven't watched the episode yet, go back to last week and watch the one I did on the 5 potential outcomes for the Seahawks and Geno Smith this offseason, because I talk in detail about what I would do and what I want them to do. And part of that equation is just start drafting a guy every year, at least until you hit on a guy that you're sure of. Finally, go back to that Green Bay model that John Schneider talked about and has never done, and just start taken bites at the apple. And this is an interesting draft to do it. There's some guys with some upside there. Beck not being in that class, though, any other quarterback that you hear deciding to stay in college hurts the Seahawks, in a sense. The more options that are out there, the more chance that a guy the Seahawks might like being available when they want him to be available. Okay. Guys, thanks for watching. Again, shout out to BetUS and Doer, and to all of you. Subscribe to the channel. If you're on audio, also subscribe. That's, then you'll get the episode whenever it comes out and hits your library. There's always a little bit of a delay, especially when I do a live show, because then I take the audio afterwards and post-produce it and send it out. And it does take a little longer for it to hit Apple Podcasts than it does Spotify. I've noticed that for those of you who watch or who listen to Apple, probably because the interface that I use to upload the audio podcast to is owned by Spotify, so they take care of themselves first, right? Let me know in the comments what you think of these names. Any I didn't mention that you like? Any from this list that you like the most? What do you think about the idea for the live show Monday through Friday? Tell me what you think about that as well. In the meantime, you'd think I'd be good at this by now. In the meantime, tune in tomorrow. Corbin Smith of Locked On Seahawks and All Seahawks will be joining me for his season wrap-up and where he sees this offseason going. Follow me on Twitter and Blue Sky at Seahawks Forever. Until tomorrow, thanks for watching. Forever and always go Hawks.